everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Faerie Conclave. I'm your host, Alec. This is episode 124. Also, my pronouns are he, him, and I'm super excited to be joined by an extra special guest. It's Chris. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great. Yay. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, thanks for being here. I have run into you at least a couple MagicCons over the last couple of years. And one of my favorite interactions that we had was you were asking me about what cards I was like waiting in line to get signed. And I started talking about my Oozes deck. And you asked me who the commander was. And I told you. And then you like corrected me on the name of the commander and like how it's pronounced because you had actually designed the card. And I was just like, okay, this is perfect. Now I know exactly how to pronounce this commander's name. And I just thought that was such a cool interaction. So yeah, thank you for that.
Oh man, it's so funny that is that me correcting you is your memory of me. But the no, I love going to Magic Cons for that very reason. I mean, it's awesome. I try to make it to as many as I can every year. It's awesome to just meet fans and you know, as someone who's working at Wizards making the game, it's really valuable to me to be able to go to these events and meet and talk with people, because sometimes, you know, it can be, we're working in our building with all of our employees separately from everyone. It can be easy to forget all of the people who aren't on social media and aren't influencers necessarily, who just love the game and love playing it, and they bring so much energy and positivity. So being able to go to MagicCon to really meet those people, it always fills me with a lot of energy. It's very inspiring, and I think it definitely helps me when I get back to the office to be like, bring such joy and just such a great game to all these people. So I love going to MagicCons, and I definitely, you know, hopefully run into you and your listeners many times in the future.
Yeah, and I bet it must be really rewarding to have experiences like that at MagicCons. My day job, I also do, it's not game design at all, but I also work for a company that like creates a consumer product. Mm-hmm. And I'm just, you know, I'm like working every day. I'm looking at spreadsheets. I'm in meetings, and I totally don't have context most of the time for like the product we're putting out there and like how it helps people and how people really like it. And then when I like run into somebody that's like using this thing I've made or designed or whatever, and they're just like, I love this thing and it's so great and it's changed my life. I'm like, oh, that's why we're doing this. And it's, so I bet it must be cool to be able to see that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's so rewarding. It's so meaningful. And in Magic, we're really lucky to have such great in-person events focused on our game that brings our community together. It's something that's really special that I think is, you know, it's harder to get even from, you know, there's a lot of video games that have much, much larger player bases. But it can be hard to see everyone physically together in the same space. So that's something awesome about Magic and tabletop games that really brings people together.
Totally. Yeah, there's nothing like the feeling of walking in and seeing 1,000 people just sitting at tables playing Magic and talking about Magic. Before we get too far, I mean, we've already spoiled that you do work at Wizards, but would you like to also introduce yourself and what exactly you do there and some of your connection to Magic?
Yeah, so I am Chris Mooney. I have they, them pronouns, and I work at Wizards of the Coast. I'm a senior game designer. I work on a lot of different parts of the process and a lot of different types of projects. To list some out, it's so tough because we work so far ahead. So there's a lot of things I've worked on already that still haven't even been announced yet. But for things that have come out, I worked a lot on Wilds of Eldraine and Tarkir Dragonstorm. I worked on the Universes Beyond projects for Doctor Who and for Fallout. I've done some silly things as well, like all of the My Little Pony cards I was involved in making. Yeah, those were really fun. In the near future, I was the game design lead for Avatar Universes Beyond, Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so that is really exciting. That comes out later this year, and I will not stop talking about it for the rest of my life. So I'm very excited to talk about that. You know, obviously can't say anything now, but looking forward to talking about that. But so those are just a few of the things that I've worked on. But, you know, over at Magic, we really have many hands touching sort of everything that we're making. So there's a lot of individual cards and mechanics from other sets I've had a hand in as well. And something that, maybe is especially relevant since we'll be talking about Commander deck today, I was the lead designer for Streets of New Capenna Commander and Lost Caverns of Ixalan Commander. Both of which I've gotten a lot of great reception from the audience about. So thank you everyone who loves those decks and has told me about how your favorite commander is from those. It's really awesome to hear that stuff.
What a resume. Like, you just listed off some absolute bangers of products from Wizards. So
thank you.
Yeah, incredible work. And I agree. I feel like the new Capenna commander decks and the Ixalan commander decks, they have some of the cards that like have kind of weird or unusual mechanics that will like pop up in some Scryfall searches, and I'm like, oh, what is this card? And then it's always from like one of those two commander deck sets.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely someone who really loves to bring back old Magic mechanics, especially when we can kind of do them in a new light. So that's something that really inspires me, and I know that there are other designers at Wizards who have also sort of dipped their toes into that after seeing me do it. So, but yeah, always really love kind of, one of the things that is really a strength of Magic is just how long it's been around and how many mechanics that we've made. And to me, Commander decks, similar to Horizon sets, are places where we can really dig into that well of old mechanics and kind of say, hey, we have all these tools in our toolbox. Let's break them out for, one more card many years later. And I think that's something that really helps to get people invested in the game for so long.
I totally agree. And I feel like it's fun to see new cards in that context that kind of like maybe adjust something or like add a little something extra with like modern design to old mechanics. Like, seeing a new card with Threshold on it that cares about something more kind of like modern design wise is just like cool seeing a new card, and it's cool seeing a throwback to an old mechanic but with like a little twist on it. So yeah, I'm totally on board for that. Please keep doing it.
I will do.
Sweet. Okay, and we are here today to talk about one of your favorite commander decks. I'm really excited to get into thinking about what a Magic game designer plays in your free time. That's really interesting to me. So, but yeah, before we get into the interview, I will do a quick shout out for a random patron at the Conclave Mentor patron level. So today, big shout out to Lee. Lee, thank you so much for being a patron. I really appreciate it. Okay, it's time. Let's get into the interview. So, Chris, my first question for you is, who is the commander of the deck we're going to be talking about today, and what inspired you to build it in the first place?
All right, so my commander is Goreclaw, Terror of Qal Sisma, and the deck's title is Fourclaw. So this is a deck that is themed all around the number 4. So every card in the deck has to have a 4 on it. It could be the power, the toughness, the monocost, in the text box, in the name, in the art. There's all sorts of places where a 4 can show up. And, what really inspired me is I think that for a long time, there were people who would really go out of their way to make some commander deck that, it's kind of based around a gimmick. I think, to me, the one that always comes to my mind is Ladies Looking Left, which is all, in the art, all has women that are looking to the left of the art box. And I think that's such a funny idea, and I loved taking that and kind of, doing something like that. Similarly, I've always loved Goreclaw, just one of my favorite cards. And, Goreclaw herself cares about the number 4. So I felt like, oh, this is perfect. It's kind of a funny name for a deck. And just digging into Magic's history and finding all the different ways I could get 4 puns and 4 gags into the deck. And this, I made this deck many years ago, but I think it's kind of taken on a new life, a new meaning to me because of the commander bracket system, where, part of what the commander bracket system is hoping to do is to encourage people to build in these spaces that maybe they otherwise weren't thinking of. And this deck is always the one that I go to, even though it's themed around the number 4. It's the one that I always go to showcase kind of what I think a really cool bracket 1 commander deck looks like in terms of saying, hey, the focus of this deck is really to showcase this super fun theme and to show off cards that maybe players haven't seen before, or maybe they've seen them before, but they never thought about them in this way. And, the deck is still, I've won a lot of games with this deck, but it's definitely not, the focus point isn't on anything particularly strong, and more about the flavor and the humor in the card choices.
I think that is so cool. It's like everyone loves to see a gimmick deck like that. And like you said about the bracket system, I feel like it has kind of given space for these decks to exist and like play against each other in a way that wasn't previously kind of like put out there for people. And kind of talked about this a little bit before recording, but one thing I have been looking for, and I think I would like to see more of, is just people's examples of what a bracket 1 deck looks like. And this is exactly it. Like just having a whole deck based around the number 4 is hilarious to me, but it's not like low powered. There are definitely some strong cards I'm seeing in this deck list, but of course they like fit within this very silly theme that has a lot of charm to it.
Right. Yeah. I definitely want to help to kind of spread the word of what, a cool bracket 1 deck might look like. Obviously, they don't all have to be, as gimmicky as this, but I definitely think that when we put out bracket 1, there were a lot of people who were sort of asking, I don't really understand this. This isn't something that I normally do. And kind of, I think for some people, they were thinking, is this just supposed to be like, bad card? Just like, don't try and win. But I think really the spirit of bracket 1 is about trying to put the focus on something other than winning or other than having the best card. So we'll see that there are going to be a lot of cards in here that, they might not be the strongest cards at what they do, but they're fun because of how they connect into the theme. And it kind of gives you the opportunity to, in my mind, when I think about bracket 1, and if I'm building a bracket 1 deck, what is my goal? And I think a lot of the goal is to just have a good time at the table. And when I play this deck, I explain the theme to everyone. And then every time I play a card, pointing out the way in which that card connects into the theme of 4 in a way that people maybe weren't expecting or wouldn't have thought of before. Oftentimes it gets a good laugh. And I think that to me, that's kind of an example of the type of experience that you can get out of bracket 1 is, are you trying to make people laugh with jokes? Are you trying to maybe tell a specific story? Like your deck is based around a story that you really love or a different theme, but just anything that allows for each of the cards in the deck to connect back in and to get people excited or interested in what you're doing beyond just the gameplay ramifications. I think that is really where bracket 1 decks can shine.
Totally. And I think it's so fun as just like something to talk about with the people you're playing Magic with. And one thing I think would be so funny is to have somebody borrow this deck who doesn't know what the gimmick is, and then say, okay, play this deck, and then like try to figure out what the theme is. And so then every card they're drawing, they're like trying to figure out, like solve this puzzle of like what ties all of these random cards together. Yeah. And I am curious like how long it would take to figure out that it's around the number 4, because that's such a random thing. But some of these cards are, well, we'll get into some of these choices, but I'm like, I don't know if I would put any of this together. So that's like exactly a good example of something outside of winning the game that is like a goal for you at this bracket. And I think that's really cool. It also reminds me of, I have a Slime Against Humanity deck. And the kind of little gimmick I did for that deck was I ran around MagicCon Chicago 2024 when that set had come out, if I'm not mistaken. And I had a bunch of people sign different copies of Slime Against Humanity that I play in this deck. I remember playing that deck on a live stream, and every time I played a Slime Against Humanity, like all these people in the chat were asking me whose signature it was. It was really funny. I was trying to like decipher these signatures that were mostly unreadable, and also trying to like connect it to the people I had met. And yeah, it was like a fun little mini game outside of where I would play it. And then I'd be like, oh, I can't exactly read what this says. And we would try to kind of like figure out whose signature it was. But yeah, it just adds like another element on top of your regular mechanical Magic game. And I think that adds something special. Okay, so my next question for you about this deck is, tell me a little bit about the history of the deck and like maybe some changes you've made to it, especially since you mentioned you had built this deck like long before Bracket 1 was a thing. So yeah, I'm curious about that.
Okay, yeah. So in terms of the history of the deck, basically it started out by me saying, all right, Goreclaw cares about the number 4. That kind of sounded like a funny idea to me. Call the deck Fourclaw, which I think is very funny. So then I sort of went in and started looking for, okay, what are all the ways to care about force? Because, you know, if you wanted to build a deck where every creature had power 4 or toughness 4, that would not be too hard. But I also think that it wouldn't necessarily be that interesting, just because I think it would kind of get old fast. Like you sort of get what's going on. So I really went out of my way to try and find, okay, what are all the different ways that 4 could show up on a card? So, you know, you've got power, toughness, and then in the mana cost, I don't count mana value 4. You have to have specifically the numeral 4 in your mana cost. So, you know, I've got a lot of cards that cost 4 green or 4 green, or, you know, like Hornet Queen, 4 green. Like they have the number 4 there. Power, toughness, mana cost, these are sort of the things that we would normally expect for there to be a 4. So I went one step further out from that. So the word 4 in the text box, you know, so you've got activated abilities that cost 4 mana, like on Rogue's Passage or Throne of the High City. But you also have the word 4, usually if you're doing something like, oh, you make 4 tokens, like Hornet Queen makes 4 insects. Verdurous Gear Hulk puts 4 counters on things, right? You got Gaia's Will, which has suspend 4. Mosswort Bridge, you know, Hideaway, you look at 4 cards, right? So finding more and more different ways. There's a few more that I thought found really funny. So Lignify turns a creature into a 0/4, and is a really good, you know, mono green interactive spell, which is important. Apex Devastator has Cascade 4 times. So these are the things that I started to find, like, okay, so there's a lot I can dig into here. I think this is going to be fun. Let me go further and think of more potential ways to care about the number 4. So one of them is, you know, the word 4 in the name of the card. And this one led to a lot of really funny cards for me. Like, there's a card called Fortitude. I had never seen this card in my life before. And it's kind of a very silly effect as well. Where, right, you can sacrifice a forest to regenerate enchanted creature. So I wouldn't say it's a very strong card, but it is, you know, plays into that theme, which is just something that I love. Similarly, cards like the Forebearer's Blade, you know, and Mirror of the Forebearers. These are cards that, especially since my commander is a literal bear that cares about the number 4, I thought that was fun. You've got stuff like Regal Force, Endray's Forerunners, Vastwood's Fortifications. And right, a lot of these cards have 4s elsewhere on the card too. So I loved the idea of finding cards that had multiple instances of 4. For example, my absolute favorite card in the deck, the one that I love talking about, is Tower of Fortunes. It costs 4 mana, and you pay 8 mana to draw 4 cards. So there's a 4 in the title and the cost and in the text box. I love it. It's so funny to me. And, you know, like, I love how these kinds of deck building quests, I mean, yes, these cards are funny, and some of them are quite weak, but a lot of them are totally powerful. And, you know, this deck is really a mono green kind of ramp stompy deck, and it totally plays well, and it can win games. It's just that not every card selection is necessarily optimized for the strongest option available. And I think that's really what kind of separates out these thematic decks in terms of really maximizing for telling fun stories or creating fun situations. Just to go through kind of one of the last sections of the deck, the last kind of area of 4-ness that I found was, so obviously you got to have lands in here. And in terms of basic lands, you know, a green has the forest. And so I thought that the idea of forests being the number 4 and tying into that, I thought that was funny. And there's definitely cards in this deck that their only connection to the number 4 is that they care about forests, like you know, Song of the Dryads or Nature's Lore. However, I did feel like I needed to up my game a little bit, and just having any old forest would not do. That felt a little bit cheap. So I specifically went out and found forests that have 4 things in the art. So for example, like forests that have 4 trees or 4 dinosaurs or 4 skulls, or there's a forest from Amonkhet that has 4 little stones in the background. So I really was like, how can I take this to the next level? How can I make these forests as 4 themed as possible? And I had a lot of fun kind of searching out these specific forests, and I found 7 different forests that all have 4 things in the art. And then, of course, I got 4 copies of each. So there's exactly 4 of each forest. I had a lot of fun putting that together and just kind of going down the rabbit hole of which cards get the right mix of funny, but also functional, right? I don't just want to have cards that fit the theme but aren't very good. I want to make sure that the deck actually plays, so that as I'm playing this deck, potentially for years on end, that it's not getting kind of too boring or too repetitive of, every game I just play the cards, but there's no really way for me to win. I just kind of sit there. Just looking through, trying to think of if there's any other fun things to mention. Battle Mammoth. So it doesn't have a 4 anywhere on it, but it has the mechanic foretell.
Of course, yes.
You also have a card like a Hunted Troll, which gives 4 fairy tokens to an opponent. We've got Izuri's Predation, which makes a bunch of 4/4 tokens that then fight everything. Nissa Worldwaker, which turns things into 4/4 elementals. One last card that I love is Ecological Appreciation. This card searches up 4 different creature cards with different names and lets you put 2 of them into your hand. So just finding lots of different ways of using the number 4. I think that the number 1 card for most 4s on it is probably Golden Guardian. This card costs 4. It's a 4/4. And when it transforms to its backside, it's Gold Forge Garrison. And you pay 4 mana to create a 4/4 Golem token. So I think that this card takes the cake for having the most instances of 4 on it.
Incredible. One thing I also think is cool about this deck is for a bracket 1 deck with a silly theme like this, I think going with green as the color of choice is really smart, because I feel like green has some of the most reliable kind of like backbone in Commander, because you have a lot of high cost cards in this deck to kind of like fill out that theme, but like what better to let you play all these high cost cards than the color green? So
I tend to find that in a vacuum, mono green is definitely, I think, one of the more challenging monocolors to build, in the sense that you don't have a lot of the interactive tools that other colors have. You do have access to a lot of mana and a lot of card draw. Mono green is very strong in that sense. But mono green can kind of struggle in certain circumstances, especially like, for example, like, your board gets wrathed, and then it can sometimes be hard to recover from there. So one of the things that I found really interesting was thinking of, for example, normally in mono green, I would play a card like Heroic Intervention to try and protect all of my creatures. But I can't, because it doesn't fit the theme, right? So I've got to kind of think about other ways of getting around some of those issues. So, for example, in mono green, one of the core removal spells would be Beast Within, right? Answers any permanent, instant speed, has a drawback, right? But not a very strong, not a very relevant one. Beast Within is kind of a staple of green decks everywhere, but especially mono green decks. However, it doesn't fit the theme, right? I can't play Beast Within. It doesn't have a 4 anywhere on it. So then it kind of leads you to other cards that maybe you've played before, but kind of cut from other decks, or maybe they're just not normally strong enough. So, right, Song of the Dryads turns something into a forest. But cards like Lignify, right, okay, turns into an 0/4, helps get rid of a creature. And Kenrith's Transformation is another one that lets you get rid of a problematic creature. And right, these cards, they're not weak. They are pretty usable cards, but you might not ever bring yourself to playing them when you have stronger staple options. And so I think one of the things that picking a strong theme for your deck and sticking to it can do is help you to kind of look for non-staples, like things that maybe are a little bit off the beaten path. And I think that's a really fun aspect of Commander, because you're losing a little bit of efficiency here and there, but the cards aren't too weak to play, and you'll see a lot of a larger variety in your games because it's like, well, I've cast Beast Within so many times, I know what it does. But, someone might not have been prepared for a card like, Cameron's Transformation. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, I was really expecting my card to get destroyed. Instead, it's been turned into a vanilla 3/3 and I can't get the death trigger or something like that. Right. And so I think that that's a really fun aspect of the theme kind of leads you to different cards, and then the different cards make your games feel different from what you might be used to playing in Commander. And that's really one of the beauties of Commander is how much variety there is when you're really exploring out the decades old card pool that Magic has to offer.
Yes, I think that's something that's really important too, to kind of keep your mind like brewing all the time. It's so easy every time you make a green deck to throw a Rampant Growth or Beast Within in there. But like, how about checking out something like Roar of Challenge as a piece of interaction? Nobody probably knows off the top of their head what that one does. Or like Verdant Mastery.
I love Roar of Challenge because I was a huge Khans of Tarkir draft player. So I love that card. But right, like Verdant Mastery. Okay, so this is a card that is a ramp spell that is definitely not one of the most efficient options. Either it's going to cost more or you're giving something out to other players, right? So it might not be people's where they first go to, but again, like having an excuse to play cards more off the beaten path just really leads you to fun and interesting game states that you might not ever get otherwise.
Totally. Yeah, I love that. And speaking of Khans of Tarkir Limited, I have to take a moment to talk about See the Unwritten, which is probably one of my favorite cards ever. I have whiffed so badly with this card before, and I've also had the best drops with this card, and it just holds a special place in my heart. And I love seeing it through this context of this deck where I'm like, wait, what is the 4 on this card? But it's like, if a creature you control with power 4 or greater, it has the Ferocious ability and also costs 4 green. So now I'm like looking at it through this other lens. I think that's really fun.
The idea for this deck came about purely from I wanted to play Goreclaw, and I thought of a fun idea for it. I think that's something that people at home, if they want to build a Bracket 1 deck, I think we all have cards, kind of pet cards, where we're like, wow, this card is awesome. I love playing it. It's totally my jam. But I don't have a deck that it fits into. It's not good enough, or it doesn't fit the theme or whatever. And I think that those are the kinds of things that can just inspire you to say, hey, like this card has some quirk about it, and I'm going to choose that quirk to be the whole thing my deck is built around. And that will lead you to finding other cards that maybe you hadn't ever thought of before, or maybe hadn't thought about in years, and you're excited to bring those back and get to play with them again. I think that that's something that is really one of the strengths of Commander, is just having access to all of those older cards. Like, for example, Endray's Forerunners is a card that is, for most intents and purposes, a weaker version of Craterhoof Behemoth. But there are definitely slight differences there, and the fact that this deck, can't play Craterhoof and can play this card means that I have definitely gotten to, play a lot of games where, oh, well, I play this and turns out the vigilance is super relevant and it keeps me in the game in a situation where otherwise I might have, only been able to kill one player and died to the crackback of someone else. So I think that, right, just getting to have those different experiences is something that's really fun about Bracket 1 decks.
Yeah, I really like that this conversation is like us trying to get people to build Bracket 1 decks, because I really do think it is important for people who have like pet cards and favorite cards, just like you mentioned, but it's like they're not quite strong enough, or they don't have the synergies right now to kind of like put a whole deck together at even Bracket 2. I think it's so important to realize and like build with the intention that there is a place for cards like that. Yeah, and then playing them against decks like this is just, it would just be so much fun. Like everyone's playing their favorite pet cards, everyone's smiling, everyone's like trying to find the little clues on each card about how it fits into the theme. Like, that's just fun. I like that.
Yeah, totally. And I do think that in general, if you're building for Bracket 1, you want to kind of aim for a power level that can be competitive with Bracket 2. I think that this deck, I would say overall as a package, probably a little bit weaker than bracket 2, but can definitely hold its own. I've definitely won games where other people are just playing kind of their standard, lower power decks that don't have any specific gimmicks or anything about them, and have been able to win those games. So I do think that you want to aim for a balance there, especially since I think that hopefully as time goes on and we can have more sort of examples of people talking about and showing off bracket 1 decks, there'll be more and more players who have bracket 1 decks that want to play together. But I do think that generally when I go to events, it's normally people have bracket 2 decks and I maybe am the only one with bracket 1. But yeah, I'm happy to play in those games. And I think that you want a deck that can hold its own in that environment, even if it's maybe a little bit disadvantaged, which is kind of where I think that this deck is in my experience. The main things that I think help with that are, A, you want to make sure that even in your bracket 1 decks that you have the right mix of interactive pieces that help you stop other people from winning, as well as kind of ways for your deck to really be able to win games. I think something that can oftentimes be a struggle for bracket 1 decks is that none of your cards maybe are playing the role of, this is my finisher. When I cast this, I'm expecting that the game is going to end pretty quick. I think that's something that can really help bracket 1 decks to have the sort of explosiveness they need to close out games against bracket 2. And I also think that, commander decks to sort of hang in an environment with other more powerful decks, you still need to have kind of your bread and butter effects. You need to have card draw. You need to have mono ramp. You have ways of answering, a large board. But I think that with bracket 1, you're maybe looking for more interesting or more off the beaten path options for those slots in your deck. So you still want that kind of consistency that's going to allow you to play the game, but you can find some cards that are maybe a little bit less loved and give them a chance to shine.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I feel like the point of bracket 1 isn't to fully detach yourself from a functional deck that can still play out a game at kind of a normal pace, but just shows off some theme that otherwise you wouldn't be able to if you were playing purely for power level or the speed of the game. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's cool. I think that's really good advice that you have about how to build bracket 1, and the fact that you mentioned the balance with theme but also function, I think, is something that is important for people to think about. And it's not just it's bracket 1, so there's no function at all and it will just not do anything. I feel like that's not true, and you can totally build, like you said, a deck that can still punch up to bracket 2 if it needs to, and you'll still have a good time playing it. So we've talked about a lot of specific cards in the deck, and this is kind of a funny question that I normally ask, but for this deck it's a little silly. But what would you say is the MVP card of this deck, whether it's theme or function or something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've talked about, Golden Guardian, I think, has the most 4s. So in some ways, that's an MVP on its own. I think Tower of Fortunes is one of my favorite cards just in terms of in my heart. I love it. It's so bad, but it's so fitting in the theme. And, in sometimes commander games go long and you just pay 8 mana to draw 4 cards and you're, but I wouldn't say that's an MVP in terms of the gameplay. In terms of cards that I think are really key to the deck, so again, I think End-Raze Forerunners is a great finisher. I think that certain cards like Blackblade Reforged are really important to offering sort of an inevitability to the deck. I think that sometimes decks like this that are mono green and kind of just hold on to you generate mana, you generate board presence, you maybe recuperate some of your cards, and you can survive a long time, but sometimes you need something that allows you to really go over the top of other decks in the late game, should if you're able to hold on that long. Blackblade Reforged just being, stats that sticks around after Wraths and kind of turns any creature you draw into a big threat, even like a Monodork. I think that that's something that's really useful. It sounds silly, but I do really love Goreclaw herself. I mean, she's in the command zone, so obviously she's going to be a key part of the deck. But it is really the inspiration for the deck because I love just, hey, I'm going to play this medium-sized creature, and then it's going to power out a ton of more large-sized things, and really puts a lot of damage out very early in a way that a lot of decks, even bracket 2 decks, they're not necessarily prepared for that amount of stats in the early game. Yeah, one last thing that I would mention is, and probably one of the strongest cards in the deck just from a pure power level standpoint, is Silven Library. So this is a card that I don't really include in most commander decks that I make because it bogs the game down a lot. So it can really slow things down. And I just think that it's such a powerful card that it often draws a lot of attention, a lot of heat towards you. So yeah, it's not a card that I like playing very often, but it has the number 4 on it. And to me, one of the fun things about bracket 1 is that just because your deck overall wants to be at a lower power level and be more focused on theme, it doesn't mean that you can't still have a few really strong cards, especially if they're cards where it's like, hey, I don't really play this card elsewhere. I don't have anything specifically for it. Let me put it in this goofier deck where it's going to be super strong. Like I said, Silven Library is probably stronger than almost every other card in this deck. But because it is mostly enabling a very silly strategy, it doesn't have that same level of like threat or that same level of drawing aggro from the other players. And sometimes again, players are surprised and they think it's funny when it's like, oh, all your deck is entirely full of these silly 4 cards, and then of course you have this card which is so strong that it happens to fit the theme as well. I think a little bit of that really helps to make bracket 1, I think, a lot of fun. It is something that I always caution players where if you pick a theme and then put in a bunch of really strong famous cards that fit the theme, it can sometimes feel like, oh, well, you're not really digging into the theme as a way to play something fun. You're mostly using it as kind of an excuse to, you're like, hey, don't worry about me, my deck is silly, and when actually you really have a lot of strong cards. So I think you have to do it very sparingly, but I do think having a couple of high profile cards that fit your theme can help to round out your deck overall, and make sure that you have a couple of games where you get to do something really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, and it does add something also when you are resolving your Silven Library and the 2 extra cards you drew are Frog Hemoth and Challenger Troll.
Yes, exactly. That right. That adds to a lot of the, hey, don't worry everyone. I drew Tower of Fortunes off my Silven Library, so you're safe. And I do think that if you're ever playing a bracket 1 deck in a group of bracket 2 decks, I do think that's something that you do have to leverage a little bit, is basically being like, not only is it fun to point out all of your silly cards that fit your theme, but I also think it's an important part of your gameplay of basically being like, hey, my deck can win, but it's also going to have a bunch of draws that are kind of, more on the silly side and aren't very strong. And you want to, make sure you're telegraphing that to the other players so that, you maybe don't get focused down as much and you maybe have a little bit more room to build your engine or draw the right cards that you need to actually fight back.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's a really smart way to do it. And one thing I also wanted to mention is I feel like something that I think adds a lot of fun and longevity to a deck is the ability to look at new cards that are coming out and evaluate how those will fit in the deck and if they'll bring any new cool synergies to a deck. And I think in the context of this deck, that is so funny because a new set comes out and you're just searching for the number 4 or looking through the arts for 4 items of something. And it's just a very different context from being here's my vampire deck. Let's see if there are any new vampires. And then it's way easier to search that than it is to to look for this. But I think that adds a lot of fun to the process of it too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it is fun to have a new kind of thing to look for with each new set that comes out, or just to say, hey, like, I mean, sometimes it can be overwhelming, right? Like, with just, if you've got a deck that is themed around something that's really open-ended, something that we do all the time, like, for example, like making tokens, right? I mean, we make a
Yeah.
lot of token cards, and so there's a lot of cards that come out that you have to kind of consider if you want to keep your deck updated. But for the deck that has more of a thematic edge, it's more of like, oh, you just look at each cards, and then when you see one that happens to fit your theme, you're like, huh, like now I can really ponder if this makes the cut. So yeah, I think that is a building these kinds of very thematic decks that are looking for something that is off the beaten path. It's fun to put them together, kind of going through Scryfall and really like searching through the history of Magic, and it's, or searching through your own collection at home. I've built maybe 2 or 3 commander decks now just from like grabbing cards out of boxes in my house, and I think that's another really fun way to put a deck together, which is thinking more about just, hey, what cards do I have lying around from
Yes.
old precons that I haven't played in a long time, or draft chaff that I have sitting in a box somewhere. That's also really fun. But yeah, I think that people love Commander for all sorts of different reasons, and I think one of them is really just like, it's a format that both allows you to and kind of gives you permission to play these cards that are not necessarily the specific, best in class cards. And you don't necessarily need or any reason other than I thought it was fun.
Yeah, and that kind of brings it back to like the classic nostalgic method of deck building that we all remember, which is exactly that. It's like putting this together because I think it's fun, and I'm like searching for inspiration by digging through old boxes of cards that I already have. Yeah, and just like putting a stack together on your desk. I feel like something about that is just, it's so good. It brings me back for real. Okay, I do have a question. Are you ever tempted when a card that you're like designing could almost have a 4 in it? Like, are you ever tempted to bump that power down or the toughness up or something like that?
Yeah, that's a really funny question. What I'll say is that I personally don't like doing that. When I'm designing cards, I'm almost always thinking about them just in the context of whatever product I'm putting them in. So like if it's a main set, I'm thinking about, draft and standard and commander. If it's a commander precon, maybe I'm thinking more about commander, like what different commander decks it could go into. To me, I'm always thinking about kind of the theme of that card and what's right for that card first. However, there are plenty of people in my office that they are like, hey, I have this idea that would go really well in my commander deck, and maybe I'll stick it into one of my sets and maybe it'll make it all the way to print. So it's definitely not unheard of at the Wizards office. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that we make so many cards now, and we're maybe slowing down a little bit, but for the past several years, each year we've made more and more cards each year, with more and more new products that we've been adding. And so because of that, like, I think that there's never a fear that we're taking space away or that we're never going to run out. We're always going to have more cards to make. And so I think that for a lot of people at the office, they're like, yeah, I mean, someone out there is going to like this really weird specific theme just as much as me. I like, for example, to give a good example of this, Ayula, Queen Among Bears. This was a card from, I think, Modern Horizons 1. That card is spawned purely from Ethan Fleischer's love of bears. He just loves bears, and he wanted a bear-themed commander deck, and so he made a commander that could lead an army of bears. And, once that card came out, like, many, many people loved it and built their own decks and have made it their own gimmick of being the bear person in their pod. Graham Stark definitely claimed the identity for him with his Bear Force 1 deck. And that deck really was very similar to the one that Ethan built himself. And so I think that just goes to show that, Wizards oftentimes will make cards that are meant for their own decks. But it's because I think that they're very likely to also be other people's favorite cards, and to inspire them to go on and enjoy those things. So I personally don't do that much, just because that's not really my way of approaching design. But many Wizards people do. So it is pretty, I wouldn't say it's super common, but it definitely does happen.
Yeah, and it makes sense too if you are designing something that you yourself will enjoy, then you can assume that there will be other people out there who will also enjoy this thing.
That's definitely one of the challenges of design overall is like, how do you balance your own personal tastes with kind of the general design group? And,
Totally.
on the one hand, we don't want to design things by committee because then everything kind of ends up a little bit too sanded down and maybe not as inspiring. On the other hand, other people will always have great and awesome ideas that you didn't think of. And they can also sometimes see problems and challenges that you didn't think of. So
Yeah.
that's always really a struggle of any sort of collaborative creative project is how do you balance individual perspective versus group perspective, and making sure that we have the right mix so that the game is never too boring, but it's also never too niche and sort of has no appeal to the wider Magic players.
And it's a lot to think about too, because you have the world that you're building for and also the specific product that you're designing for. Yeah, lots of different places to like pull inspiration from within those restrictions. So
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. And I will keep my eye out if there ever is a random card in a commander deck that just has like 16 instances of the number 4 on it. I feel like
Well, here's another example of the card Octavia from Strixhaven Commander is very specifically a card that was engineered by one of our designers because they wanted to have an octopus that had 8 instances of the number 8 on the card.
amazing.
Right. So it's an 8/8. It makes things an 8/8. It has ward 8. It costs 8 less to cast. It has 8 in the mana cost. And then there's the word 8. In the spell costs 8 less to cast if you have 8 or more instances. So there's 8 instances of the number 8 on this card. Ooh. Right. So we haven't done 4 yet. Maybe we'll see in the future some kind of card where there's 4s all around. I haven't thought about that, but if it ever comes up, then I'll take my shot.
I love that. And like, what a silly prompt to design a card. Like talking about Octavia, like such a silly prompt, but like such a cool card that came out of it and so iconic, and lots of people love it. Like Rachel Weeks plays a famous Octavia deck that everyone loves, and you wouldn't get stuff like that if somebody weren't like, hey, here's a silly idea to sneak this number into the card text.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that you definitely design, especially for something like Magic where there's so many game pieces, so many different kinds of players, right? Anywhere you can get inspiration from, it's likely going to resonate with someone out there. I will always remember this memory of I made a card in Streets of New Capenna Commander called Parnes. This is a pretty much forgotten Grixis commander. Is the secondary commander of the Maestros deck. Parnes has a very, very weird set of abilities that on the surface is not really something that a lot of people want to do. And, when I made this card, I knew that it was very niche. I knew that, hey, this is not going to be super popular. This is a card for a specific section of weirdos who want to make a really weird deck. And so I made that, and immediately, like after that product came out, maybe the first or second week, I was in a game store and I was just talking with someone. I was like, oh, we were talking about Magic. I said, oh, hey, I actually, worked on those commander decks. And they immediately pulled out of their backpack a Parnes commander deck that had found all of the weird ways of using their abilities.
Yes.
And that was such a great memory for me, not just because it was someone, liking one of the cards that I made, but also because it was a good reminder of, yes, like when you make a super weird card, like there are going to be people out there that love it so much, they're going to go build it right away because it's going to inspire them, because of how off the beaten path it is. And so I think that for me, you don't want to make those all the cards. I think Magic would be a lot worse if every card was weird, but it would also be a lot worse if we had no weird cards. And so I think it is really important to remember that part of what makes Magic so fun and magical and successful is that there are things for lots of different kinds of people, and everyone can sort of find their own personal space. And part of that means, making cards that are very weird and specific like this one.
Incredible. Wow. Yeah, I love that so much. And I really do feel like that is the kind of vibe that keeps the game alive and keeps the community smiling and keeps me coming back for more every time a new set comes out. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic kind of note to start wrapping up this episode on. But before we do, there was one other question I'm curious if you have an answer for, and that's, do you have a favorite in-game moment that you've had while you were playing your Goreclaw, Fourclaw commander deck?
I do think that for me, my favorite moments playing this deck tend to involve playing a card that someone has never seen before in their life, and them getting a big laugh out of seeing how it connects to the theme of 4 and learning what it does for the first time because they've never seen it in their life either. Maybe one of my favorite moments playing this deck, having Yeva, Nature's Herald in play, so green creatures have flash. I probably had Goreclaw in play too at this point. Flashing in End-Raze Forerunners to pump all my creatures, block someone's attackers, and eat them. And then picking it up with Temur Sabertooth so that I could replay it on the following turn. That, I think, was a pretty fun memory that I have of playing this deck. So
I like it.
But really, I think part of why I love this deck is that it's just a blast to play and helps get people outside their comfort zone and show them some cards they've never seen before. And yeah, just put everyone in a good mood usually.
Sweet. I love it. I think that is the perfect kind of way to end this episode. So, Chris, thank you so much for coming on and letting me ask you a whole bunch of questions about Fourclaw, about what you do at Wizards, and yeah, everything else we talked about. It was really fun.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and before we wrap things up, do you have any social medias or upcoming events that you would like to shout out?
Sure. I am on Bluesky at Chris K. Mooney. That's pretty much the only social media I have left, or that I'm very active on. And so that's a good place to, follow me, get in touch with me if you ever have any questions. I usually like to put a lot of, behind the scenes stories and various things of working on sets. Like when Tarkir was coming out, I posted a lot about various design stories around that. So if you ever want to hear anything like that, feel free to follow me there. And beyond that, I will be this year at MagicCon Vegas, and hopefully we'll make it out to a couple other events. My plan right now is that I'm going to be at CubeCon as well, but we'll see if I get out to anything else this year. But yeah, if you ever see me, feel free to say hi. I love meeting Magic players, and like I said at the beginning, it really is a great source of motivation and inspiration. So thank you all for playing the game.
Yes, well, truly, thank you for making it and making it so fun and so interesting. Yeah, and I will also be at MagicCon Vegas. So if you bring Goreclaw, let me know. We can sit down.
Great, yes. More bracket one games for sure.
Yes, yeah. I really would like to play more bracket one games. That's my goal for this upcoming MagicCon. So, well, yeah, Chris, thank you one last time for coming out and chatting with me about all this stuff. Thank you, everyone else, for listening. I appreciate it so much. I always shout out all my patrons at the All That Glitters level at the end. And Jeff, thank you so much. You're the best. Thanks again, and we'll catch all of you on the next episode.
See ya.